Hello and welcome back to the Kent Morning Show live on KMTV. It's just gone 7:45 this morning on the 8th of May.
Now, from a timely film about the voting of a pope, getting cardinals studying, to the tragedy of Trump's tariffs hitting our corner of the country. And of course, the film's dedicated to commemorating victory in Europe on the 80th anniversary. There's lots to talk about in the world of film and news this week. Well, our film expert, Chris Stacey, joins us now. Chris, good morning.
Hi, good morning, both.
Chris, we want to start by talking about, obviously, the voting of a new pope, the conclave, which is currently ongoing. We saw last night the black smoke rising from the Sistine Chapel. What was your reaction to that? Because not only a film expert, you're also, you're
religious studies,
really. Yes. So tell us about that, because it's all kind of timely at the moment, because there is a film that can be tied into all of this.
And more than that, it's prescient, because I saw a preview screening of Conclave back in November. The night before, as it turned out, the Archbishop of Canterbury resigned. So at the time, it was sort of, gosh, what are the chances? And of course, now we have the death of Pope Francis. But because I've been talking on Radio Kent as well, and over the last few days, just thinking how that film has mirrored and given us almost a kind of a validation for and a sense of perspective on what's happening in the real conclave. In fact, when people have said to me, what do you think about the conclave? I've had to say, do you mean the film? Because it's almost like, what's the difference between the two? And so it couldn't be more timely that film, I think, is making people from secular persuasions, as well as obviously Catholics, a sense about those inner workings, because it does feel a bit like, the film's a great conspiracy thriller. But of course, what we are finding at the moment is that, unlike in a political election, we have no idea who the runners and riders are. We know that the next pope could be a traditionalist, could be a Catholic, it could be from South America, could be from Africa or Asia, could be from Italy. We just don't know. And so when that smoke was emitted yesterday, because there has to be a 2/3 majority in order for there to be an outcome, it's unlikely that we're going to have that. I would have thought, well, we could have it end of today. The last two occasions there's been an election, it has been within about 2 days before the Pope has emerged. So all the various candidates will be eliminated, and then somebody who has a 2/3 majority will go forward. But with Pope Francis in 2013, he wasn't exactly a favourite. He wasn't the person everybody was talking about at the beginning. So it could be somebody who really surprises us.
What can you tell us about the sort of traditions around the black and white smoke as well? Because it's very ominous when the sort of black smoke rises. There were cameras on the different. It was sort of a bit of a chimney watch yesterday to see what was going to happen.
What was the colour? And lots of memes on social media as well about what if it's the wrong smoke that emerges? But I mean, the reason it's all about saying, well, because we don't see the election, there's no sort of ballot, there's no list of candidates in order, like in the elections that you were covering last week. So that's the only way of letting us know. And of course, the exciting thing is that white smoke will appear, and there'll be a few moments when we're thinking there is a new pope, but we don't know who he, and of course it is going to be a he, is. And so this is completely different from any other election that we know of. And then, of course, somebody who we may or may not have heard of will become one of the most prominent people in the entire world.
And it is so secretive. It is so there's all under wraps as to what actually happens, and quite complicated as well. There have been reports that some of those who have actually had to be part of making the vote, some cardinals have actually been watching Conclave for guidance on what they're about to undertake. Obviously, now they've been through one round of voting, they should probably know a bit more now. I mean, how much can we sort of learn from our movies? Because, it is so secretive. So this film isn't going to know everything that goes on behind closed doors, because no one really does.
What I thought that the film did really well was show that even with our great spiritual leaders, the same kind of, I'm going to be careful about using words like backstabbing, but there's that sense that they're gossip mongering, the sense of saying, how do I ensure that my candidate wins? Or, and often there's that old adage that anybody who goes in expecting to be Pope is guaranteed to leave as a cardinal. In other words, if you show like Michael Heseltine back in the day, it's almost like if you say you really want the top job, then the chances are you're not going to get it. And that's the adage I think that applies here. So they have to almost say, and Vincent Nichols, who's a very prominent figure of Westminster in the Catholic Church in the UK, he's not on anyone's list to be the favourite. But of course, the more that they declaim, the more that they say, I don't want the job, the more people are thinking, maybe there's a possibility here that they might emerge.
We always talk about films having impressions of people and showing sort of a different side to reality and people perhaps latching onto that. Do you think there's a danger of this dual reality that we're in right now, if people are watching this film and thinking, that's exactly how it works, that it's exactly that backstabby, and it's exactly that sort of the conspiracy sort of thriller behind it? Is there a danger, as there are with other movies about real world problems, of us thinking, oh, this is exactly how it goes?
I've had this conversation because I saw A Few Good Men at the cinema the other day, and people have said, you know, life doesn't always work like it does in the movies. But of course, sometimes it does. And of course, in the case of Conclave, well, let's put it this way, without giving away the ending of Conclave, but if the next Pope emerges, who's a character who's anything like the person who emerges in this film, then that would be a real shock to the Catholic Church. So no, a serious point is, it gives you a sense of almost like the character building. It gives you a sense of the tapestry, but it's very unlikely that obviously that the film, which is there for dramatic purposes, a conspiracy theory if you like, is going to play out in the real world. But if they've all been watching it, and often the cardinals, 80% of them have been appointed since 2013 by Pope Francis, many of them don't know each other. They're going to be finding each other for the first time. They might well be electing somebody that they don't know, and that person might have a backstory that it's not like here everybody can Google and the world can say, no, this person shouldn't be a good candidate. There's not much they can do when they're in a secret gathering. So it may well be that there'll be revelations in the coming days. But maybe I'm thinking too much of Conclave.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All the politics that goes on behind it. Well, speaking of politics, Trump's tariffs, the sort of latest round of his announcements is that there will be 100% tariffs on films made outside the US, and we talk about it all the time. There are so many films that are made here in Kent. How do you see it affecting the UK and Kent's sort of filmmaking market?
Well, when you think about the film that we were talking about just the other week, The Amateur, with Rami Malek and the whole, I can never forget that. You know, that's Kent. That's near Canterbury, isn't it? But you know, that's an American house. It's set in Langley, Virginia, and it was filmed here in Kent. So what I think we'll find, unless Trump changes his mind, because obviously the whole issue of tariffs is ongoing and it seems very fluid, but it does seem to me that it could be that some of those films that are presently made over here, which are brilliant for the Kent film industry, will have to be made in the real Langley, Virginia.
Do you think it's, I suppose the impact that would then have, it would be a shame to say goodbye to some really famous filming locations here, and sort of it's a key part of the sort of the income, especially sort of things like the historic Dockyard Chatham. Of course, they have the museum there. There's lots of history there that will live on. But it being such a well-known filming location as well, things like Call the Midwife. And
Mission Impossible, which is coming out in just a week and a half time.
Blockbuster.
Yeah. So I mean, if things go as they do, I think it's going to be damaging. However, watching the new Mark Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, meeting Trump, and Trump used the words, it takes two to tango. In other words, I think there will be negotiations. I mean, it may well happen as he says it will, but it may well be that down the line things will be a bit more fluid, which would be good, obviously, from the point of view of the Kent film industry.
Okay, and speaking of history, of course, today marks 80 years since VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. We've been talking about it lots on the programme this morning, but it got us thinking about those films, those recreations of that time as well. What sort of sticks out in your mind?
Well, obviously there are films, not necessarily from 1945, but from Dunkirk, obviously earlier in the war. But I have to say the film, and I've mentioned this on the programme on Kent Tonight before, is The Great Escaper. That's the Michael Caine film, which is his last film as it turned out, because he's now in his early 90s. And this was a few years ago with the late Glenda Jackson. And he plays a military veteran who's in a care home, partly filmed here in Kent, it must be said. And he goes back to France against the advice of his the hospital, the care home, but he has to do it as one last fight. And you know, I found that a more moving film in some ways than the actual battle films, the war films themselves set in the 1940s, because it's that sense of somebody with great pride all those decades later who's reliving a momentous period in his life, and he almost has to sort of make peace with the enemy, with the other side, one more time. So that's the film that stands out, and the fact that it was Michael Caine's last film, as it turns out, feels particularly poignant.
We've been hearing stories of people who were there at the time, you know, celebrating VE Day this week, and it's so important that we continue to share those stories so that, you know, it stays in our sort of national memory. But film plays a brilliant role in sort of, immortalising many of those memories, and it makes it much more accessible as well for people to actually learn things as well when it comes to, the Second World War and conflicts.
That's right, and even I know 1917 is the First World War, and of course one of Gabriel's favourite films. But what I found in watching those films is that the things that I learnt maybe in school or in the history books, sometimes it gets a bit muddled. With my grandparents' generation, they've now passed on. They lived through the Second World War. They used to tell me all their stories. But the films almost are a way of ensuring that younger audiences don't forget the important lessons of history. And often, and this is the thing, we have Joe Biden, of course, in the UK at the moment. And sometimes it feels that politicians don't learn the lessons of the past. And I think film can be a real gateway to helping us understand, and in an accessible way, in a dramatic way, in a tense way, some of those history lessons that we forget at our peril.
Do you think without the use of film and its interpretations of war, there would be such a longevity to how we look at it, and throughout the generations as well? I remember being at school watching a war film and being really engaged with it. Do you think without that, because unfortunately the drama of war itself translates to film well, in that sense of action, that sense of you have the heroes, you have the villains. Do you think that's sort of given it that longevity as well? Yes,
I think that's right. I mean, you see it, when you mentioned that, I was thinking, cowboy films, westerns do exactly the same thing. In other words, what they do, they distill the essence of something into a way that's very easy for us to process. I mean, often, if you were to ask me the ins and outs of Dunkirk, I would struggle. I'm not a military expert, but the film can at least give me a clear sense of also the human angle to that. And I think that's the thing that passes down through the generations.
All right, Chris, thank you very much today.
All right, time for a break now. When we come back, we'll have plenty more news made just for Kent, including a wrap-up of all of our headlines today.
See you then.